if you're looking for the perfect cross-stitch gift that is both cute and practical, then I think this is it, the Humble Coaster. And they're so easy to make too. Hi there Stitchy friends, I'm Kat from Catkin and Lillie, bringing you the best tips, tricks and tutorials so you can get the most joy from your stitching. So today I'm talking about how to turn your finished cross-stitch pieces into a coaster. I'll take you through my process step by step and give you all the tips along the way that I think will make it as easy as possible for you to make a stunning looking coaster. Now, before we get into actually making the coaster, I want to cover a few things to think about when selecting your design. The first thing is to get your coaster blank. Now, of course, it's possible to make coasters just as fabric pieces, but I would be way too worried about something getting spilled on them and them being ruined. So I do prefer to use some kind of solid coaster blank. And you could get acrylic ones or glass ones. Now, I love the look of these glass ones, but they're not really designed for anything as bulky as cross stitch, so it's quite tricky to get them to look good. These acrylic ones come in two pieces, so there's a front piece and then a back piece. Now, they're not quite as pretty, but they are designed to work with cross stitch, so these are the ones that I tend to go with. And I find they're quite a decent size for a mug. You can get round versions of these ones as well, and of course you may find other brands and types of coaster blank out there as well. So the second thing to think about is deciding on your design and of course making sure that it's something that will fit into your coaster blank. Now I would make sure you get your blank first and measure it rather than just relying on the sizes that are given. So these acrylic ones are 9.5 centimetres from one side to the other. And they say they have a design space, so this central area, of 8 centimetres square. But because they have this sort of bevel here, there's a slight lip on here, I would say that you can really only see about 7.5 centimetres across and down. So I would use that for the pattern sizing. Now the finished size will of course depend on the fabric count that you use, so make sure to think about that. On a side note, if fabric count is something that you find a little bit baffling, then you might like to take a look at my video all about this, which I'll link in a card and in the description for you. So for these coasters, if we're going with 7.5 centimetres square, or 3 inches, then the absolute maximum stitch count of a design that you could fit into these would be 42 stitches on 14 count, 48 stitches on 16 count, and 54 stitches on 18 count. Now, I wouldn't go right up to those because the margins would be a bit tight, and since fabric count can be a tiny little bit different than what's stated, you don't want to finish it and find that it doesn't fit. Of course, if you use a smaller design, like this sheep that will fit in a coaster, then you're less likely to have any problems. And you could pick a design that will fit in the coaster, or you could actually use smaller motifs from a bigger design. Now, if you do use a very small design, then you might like to add a simple border around the edge, just to make it fill the coaster a little bit more. So this sheep, as I say, fits perfectly well in here, but if I'd wanted to, I could have just stitched a border around the edge. And I'll show you another way later on that you can use much smaller designs to put in your coaster. So here are a couple of designs that I've chosen to make some lovely Christmas coasters. I've picked a pair of square designs from Shannon Designs, and I will of course make sure to link these in the description for you. And these are 50 by 50 stitches. So to make sure that they would fit into the coaster, I've chosen to stitch them on 18 count fabric, which would make the finished stitching just over 7 centimetres square. Now, I measured this one just to double check when I'd finished, and it's actually 6.9 centimetres across that way and 6.7 vertically, which potentially makes it a little bit more awkward for finishing it into a square coaster, but honestly, no one can really see the 2mm difference. Okay, let's look at the supplies that you'll need for making up your coaster. There's the obvious ones, your finished stitching and your coaster blank. I've also got a ruler. I've got a small piece of thin acid-free paper or card. I've got a pencil. I've got my scissors for cutting fabric, and then you'll need either a separate pair of scissors for cutting card or paper, or a craft knife, or in my case, I'm going to be using a guillotine. So step number 1 that I'm not going to be showing you here is to wash and press your cross stitch. Yes, even for a small coaster, I'm going to wash and press it, because I guess an acrylic coaster is not necessarily an heirloom gift, but I don't really want to have any discolorations appear on the fabric or threads over time just because I didn't wash it. And if you press it, it's going to look much nicer when it gets into the coaster. So I would recommend washing and pressing it. And I have a video on how to do this if you're interested, so I'll link that in a card and in the description for you. So the next thing we'll need to do is to cut the fabric down so that it's going to fit inside the coaster. Now, there's a few ways to do this. You can use the parts of the coaster to mark out where it's going to be. You can use pins to show where it will need to be and then cut the fabric. But I actually think the easiest way to do it is to cut a piece of backing card first. So on this completed coaster here, I've got my fabric piece, and then I've also put a piece of very thin card in here. Now, that backing will hide the back of your stitching, unless you want it to be visible so everyone can see your hard work. But I quite like to put a piece of thin card or paper in here. Now, you don't want anything too thick because otherwise the back won't snap into place. But you also don't want it too thin because it could look a bit lumpy on the back. So I like to use just thin card. So I think it's easier to cut this first and then cut the fabric. Now, to cut your square, you're going to need an 8cm square for this coaster. Obviously, if you're using a different coaster, then measure the size that you'll need. So I just cut this using a guillotine. If you don't have a guillotine, then you could cut it with a pair of scissors. Or for a slightly neater finish, you could use a craft knife. But once you've got your piece that's 8cm, and it will fit in there nicely. So now we're going to use this to work out what size to cut the fabric. So what I tend to do, I'm going to turn this one round. I know that I want this to have an equal space across here. Now this is easier because it is a very square design, so I can really easily see this on here. The other way that you can do it would be to put this underneath and hold it up to some light and mark on there. I'm going to do it this way and use my pencil. So 1, 2, 3, that's 4 squares to that side. 1, 2, 3, yeah, just about. So that's 4 squares there. So that should be about right for the width. And I can do the same this way, and I just need to find where the top and bottom. So I know that this is the very top of my design. So again, I can mark. If I put it there, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, just about 5 squares there. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 squares. So it's that line of stitches. And that line. Now I'm not marking it up here because I might get some pencil still slightly visible. The other thing you can do if you want to mark it here rather than following it along here is mark it one out from the one you want to go to. But now I've got those marks, I can simply come in and trim. I'm going to do this both ways because otherwise I'm going to trim that off. And to trim these, I'm just cutting along a line of squares. So yeah, this is a lot easier to do with Aida, and in fact, stitching on Aida for coasters is a little bit easier because there's a bit more structure to it. So it is easier, I think, to do designs on Aida to go in coasters. Okay, so we've got that trimmed down. Let's get our coaster blank and see, and yep, that's going to fit in there. Beautiful. So I've got the right size. Now it's got a little bit of wiggle room on it, this one. So what we'll do, then place that in there, and then just have a little look at your design. Make sure that you're happy with it, that it's square. Looks to me like that's not 100% square on there. Just going to give it a little bit of a wiggle. Have a little look, little wiggle around. Make sure that you're happy that it's sitting nice and straight. And once you're happy, I feel like I've just moved that now. Once you're happy with it, right, I'm not going to place it down. I'm going to get my back. You've got little feet on here, so obviously those go on this side. And then put that back into place. I'm going to have one final check that I'm happy with it. Yeah. Before I bite the bullet and push this down. So I would push all the way around the edges. You can hear it clicking into place, and it tends to be clicks into place along the corners, but also along the edges as well. Make sure that those are all pressed down. And that's it. So I said I'd show you an alternative way to make a coaster if you've got a much smaller design, and it's like this one. So I've stitched a tiny little robin, I've cut around the fabric and frayed the edges, and then I've attached it to a piece of pattern paper, and this I've cut to 8 centimetres. So again, that can just slot into the coaster blank, and you've got a coaster with a small motif and some lovely pattern paper. So I think that's a really lovely way to use a smaller design if you want to. So I hope that's shown you how simple it is to make a beautiful coaster as a gift, or maybe just to keep for yourself. If you enjoyed watching this, then please give it a thumbs up and tell me in the comments what else you'd like to see me make. And I hope you're subscribed too, because I have so much more stitchy goodness to share with you. Thank you so much for watching, and happy stitching.